Well, hello, everyone. I'm Jane Taylor from UPMC Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh, and I want to welcome you to the ATS Pediatric Assembly Town Hall. Today, we are going to be talking about the changing landscape of inhaled corticosteroids and how we can move forward together. So I'm going to be one of the moderators, but I have two co-moderators with me today. I would like to introduce Dr. Maria Tang Santiago from Cohen Children's Hospital, and also Dr. Adrienne O'Hagan from the University of Louisville Norton Children's Hospital. Today, we're going to start off our presentation with a presentation by Monica Federico, who is a professor of pediatrics in the Division of Pulmonology at the Children's Hospital of Colorado, and also Leslie Hendeles, which is a PharmD and professor emeritus in the College of Pharmacy at the University of Florida. So we're very excited to have him joining us today. And they will be part of the panel that will then talk about some of the current challenges that we all face and how we are addressing them. And on the panel will also be Ann Coates, an associate professor of pediatrics with the Division of Pulmonology at Barbara Bush Children's Hospital. We have Dr. Leonard Beccarrier, professor of pediatrics in the Division of Allergy and Immunology at Vanderbilt University. We have Dr. Allison Larkin, associate professor of pediatrics in the Division of Allergy and Immunology at UPMC Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh, and also Dr. Christy Sadriamelli, assistant professor of pediatrics in the Division of Pulmonology at Johns Hopkins University. After that, we will open up for 10 to 15 minutes of questions from the audience afterwards. So I'm going to go ahead and Monica and Leslie, let you get started.
So I'm going to start with why did GSK Glaxo discontinue Flovent brand? Can everybody hear me?
Yes. Good.
So if you look at all of the news releases that the company made, they're saying that they're discontinuing Flovent brand because it's making a generic version instead, and they say, quote, "These authorized generics will provide patients in the U.S. with potentially lower cost alternatives," which is not quite true. The real reason why they're actually doing this is to avoid paying higher rebates resulting from increasing the Flovent price over a period of since 2014 by 47%, which exceeded the inflation. And so there are two aspects. One is the Inflation Reduction Act, and the other one is the American Rescue Plan Act that has put pressure on them, and it would cost them an enormous amount of money in rebates. In fact, it could even, the rebate they'd have to pay might even be more than what the wholesale cost of the item is. So they've made an arrangement with a company called Prasco to have an authorized generic, and this is Flovent, but with a generic label. And,
hey, Leslie, we don't see your slides. Do you mind sharing? At least I don't.
Okay. How about now?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Do you want me to share them, Leslie?
Yeah. I don't know what.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay. Is that in this? Next slide, please.
Yeah.
So let me give you a brief case of a 2-year-old girl with viral-induced asthma whose mother is a pediatric pulmonology at UF. Since December, this patient has had 3 episodes of cough and wheeze from a viral respiratory infections contracted during daycare. She has been treated with albuterol, which she responded to, and 2 of these episodes required oral steroids. After the second episode, Flovent MDI delivered through a chamber mask was prescribed. Magellan, which is the prescription benefit manager for her insurance, denied the RX and recommended several alternatives on their formulary. She then called Magellan and identified herself as a pediatric pulmonologist, and explained why the alternatives were inappropriate for a 2-year-old. And she was advised to complete an urgent prior authorization, which she did but it was subsequently denied. As a result, she had to purchase budesonide nebulizer suspension, but her child refused to allow her to administer the nebulizer. So the parent is now trying to contact the physician, the planned physician, for a peer-to-peer conversation. Next slide, please. So what the automatic reply, the denial recommended is Advair discus, Wixella Inheb, which is a generic for Advair discus, Cuvar Redihaler, or Trilogy Ellipta for this 2-year-old child. These devices require forceful inspiration and breath hold, which the 2-year-olds aren't capable of doing. And equally important is those drugs or combinations have not been tested for safety and efficacy in patients, in preschool children. Budesonide is on their list, and of course that has been approved by the FDA, but it is less effective than fluticasone. It's inconvenient. It takes 10 to 15 minutes with a generic nebulizer to administer it. And it turns out to be more expensive because the parents have to pay for the compressor. Her prescription for budesonide nebulizer solution was $40 per month. If she had paid out of pocket for the Prasco generic for Flovent, it would have been $300 according to her pharmacy. But she did find a coupon through GoodRx that was $90. Next slide, please. Can everybody hear the?
Mhm.
I can.
Okay. So this is as you all recognize, blow by. There's been some interesting data showing that with blow by, very little drug gets into the airways, and of course it's exhausting for parents. And even if the child it doesn't fuss, it still takes 10 to 15 minutes to deliver the medication. Next slide. On the other hand, giving an MDI through a anti-static chamber with mask is much faster. It takes about a minute. It's less expensive. And there is some data to suggest, especially in kids with viral respiratory infections, that it is more effective than budesonide. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Federico.
So as you all know, because you're all of you all have joined, have struggled with this, and thank you all so much for allowing me to share our experience and sort of what we've been doing in Colorado. This has caused chaos, whether it's in the primary care office, whether it's in the specialty office, certainly at the level of the families and with the children, impacting children's health, impacting how much time people are spending trying to figure out prior auths or figure out formularies. So what we did in Colorado was we tried to put together sort of a whole guideline, which we will send out to those of you who are interested. And one of the things that we really wanted to make sure of is things that Leslie has already mentioned, and important, especially to those people who are not doing this all the time, and thinking about things like the devices. So an MDI with mask and valve holding chamber is best for children under 6 who cannot take a deep breath and hold it. Budesonide nebulizer, as mentioned, is also available, but maybe not always the best choice depending on the family or the child. Children who can create a seal around the mouthpiece, take a deep breath in and hold it, can move to mouthpiece, which is usually around the age of 6, which is also the time that you could switch to this breath actuated beclomethasone, where they really, again, just have to create a seal, take a deep breath in and hold it. Dry powder formulations are most effective in children 10 and older who can take this rapid deep breath in and breath hold. So this is at the top of our sort of cheat sheet that we've created for providers. We also have warnings about things like Brio, Arnuity, and Ellipta. The most important thing to know about this is that fluticasone furoate is much more potent than fluticasone propionate. It's about 4 times more potent. It is also more lipophilic. And so those of you who have had side effects with children and behavior and Flovent, you are even more likely to see it with Brio. And it certainly could have other side effects, has not been well studied in growing children. So one important thing just to remember is that if you're going to switch to something like this, it is dosed at 1 inhalation once a day, and that would be the appropriate dose. So we also created a table like this, and we've actually come up with a standing order for nurses to be able to switch to the extent that the formulary allows something that is age appropriate with the right device. So working within the MDIs, there's ciclesonide and mometasone, if that is available on your formulary. There's fluticasone propionate through the generic, as we were just mentioning, and then there's Q-Bar for children 6 and older. We have had families do all kinds of things. So using a spacer with Q-Bar, with beclomethasone. We even had a patient who was trying to use a spacer with a dry powder because they didn't know how to use it. Because the pharmacies may be giving them these products, they are not always teaching patients how to use them, or patients just don't know that they should ask and that the delivery is different. Importantly, as you can see in red, once daily administration has not really been FDA approved for most of these products. And 1 inhalation once a day can certainly be difficult if technique is not perfect, if the child moves around or coughs in the middle of the 1 inhalation. So all of this is not ideal, but it's what we have. So other considerations, if you want, so moving from an MDI, from fluticasone propionate MDI, is certainly to move to the nebulizer, breath actuated, or dry powder. Another alternative, which I'm sure many of you have tried, even in kids younger than you might otherwise have done this, is to move to a Symbicort MDI or Dulera MDI, because those may be on the formulary. I've certainly moved to this earlier in children, again, mostly just for the delivery device and for the sort of equivalent potency of inhaled steroid. The dry powder preparations are also available, but clearly not going to work for the young child who might be on Flovent, as mentioned in the first case. So as we navigate all this, at least in Colorado, we created something like this for children less than 7, children over 7. This applies to many of the commercial payers that we are working with here in Colorado. This may or may not apply. Leslie looked through this, and this doesn't look the same in Florida, for example, but it is really helpful. And the nurses have actually pinned this up in our workrooms. They've pinned this up where they're answering phone calls so that they can sort of rapidly look at things and look at alternatives according to the formulary of the commercial payer. So this is just an example of something that we created, but something that you might think about being able to create in your own setting. So cheat sheets for what devices work for what ages, what is a reasonable substitute, and what your formularies might allow within your state is really something that has been well received, printed out, asked for over and over again in our clinic at Children's in Denver. So with that, we can move on to discussion.
Great. Thank you for this wonderful overview of the recent issue that we've all been facing, and we certainly had it here in Kentucky as well. And then some of the ICS options. Just to get us started, per the GINA guidelines, pressurized MDI with a valve spacer is certainly the preferred delivery system in those under the age of 6. You already touched on it, but when Pulmicort, generic fluticasone, or Asthmanex are not options, as people in the chat have been commenting that we've had some shortage of Asthmanex, what do you typically go to? And in particular, what is your feeling with regard to combination ICS LABA therapy?
Well, I will just answer personally for me and then let others answer. Certainly for those children 4, 5 and older who are having any kind of exercise issues, I will absolutely move to using that. I, out of practicality, tend to do 2 puffs in the morning, which I know is not approved, but certainly anecdotally has worked. It's using, if I can do Symbicort, then it's using a lower potency medication. If I'm moving from fluticasone to budesonide, which is what's in Symbicort, then that's a less potent medication. You may need twice a day or to increase the dose. But I absolutely have used it down to as young as I need to, actually.
So I think that the first issue is that these especially the commercial payers are just don't have folks working for them that are familiar with the special needs of children. I mean, I think it, and sometimes just calling and getting to the right physician in charge or pharmacist in charge and providing some data. For example, we had a situation several years ago. We could not get Florida Medicaid to pay for Flovent in children and preschool children because the FDA labeling said it was only approved for 4 and older. But when we showed them data, and it was that and budesonide are the only 2 inhaled steroids that have been tested for efficacy and safety in the preschool age group. Once we showed that to them, they then for years later approved Flovent, even though it wasn't FDA approved. So I think the advocacy part is getting to these to the prescription benefit managers and to the insurance plan. And I have found that doing a peer-to-peer a telephone consultation with the physician in charge often makes a big difference. But it takes time. I mean, if this is done, it should only you should only have to do it once with a particular prescription benefit.
Dr.
Go
Beccaria.
ahead, Lenny.
Yeah, thanks, Les and Monica, for getting us started correctly on this. You know, there are a couple other points that I think disturb me, and I'm confident disturb others here, which is that many of these well-constructed tables feed into the insurance company's evidence-free medicine approach, in that we are now coming up with, you know, concoctions and approaches like we used to, you know, unscrew the cap of the flunicillide nasal spray and put it in the nebulizer before we had budesonide neb solutions, having no idea if this stuff works or is effective. You know, the data for ciclesinide in 6 to 11 years of age was not approved by the FDA because it wasn't demonstrated to be effective. That's why it doesn't have a label. It was actually studied in 2 phase 3 trials that didn't meet the primary endpoint. So now we're saying, well, we can give it, so we'll tolerate it even though it may not work. The other point that I think hasn't been brought up yet, but maybe even more important, is inhaler technique. So most patients can't use one inhaler correctly, and nearly every patient can't use 2 inhalers correctly. So you start mixing and matching MDIs and DPIs almost regardless of age. And what you end up with is somebody who doesn't know how to use any of their inhalers correctly. So, you know, I've always tried super hard to not cross platforms. If they're on a DPI for one, I want them on a DPI for everything, because they're going to use them wrong if given the opportunity. And here, they're going to get these devices without a visit to our offices, so they're not going to know how to use them at all. And what we're going to end up with is second choice medications being used incorrectly. And then our emergency medicine colleagues can start seeing more of these patients for exacerbations due to inadequate and appropriate therapy. So, you know, I put those other 2 concepts out there to sort of fuel this discussion.
Those are definitely great points. We've had patients who were switched to like ready inhalers without even notifying our office, and patients were using them incorrectly. So I think that's a very valid point as well. One of the other things that's has come up on our end is with the approval of Air Supra. So I know it's 18 and above, but have you guys had any experience, or are you aware of where the literature is with regard to the budesonide albuterol combination in younger age groups, and whether that's an option moving forward?
So if you look at the Mandela study that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, in the appendix there is a breakdown of the efficacy by age group, and it's very clear that in both the adolescent and the 5 to 11 age groups, it was no more effective than giving albuterol alone in that study. And so I don't know of any other data. So
We are currently doing the trial in adolescents. I might say that those studies were underpowered, and I wouldn't be as concerned. I do not anticipate insurers will allow us to prescribe it to anybody under 18. I think they will use that as a firm reason for denial going forward. But there are certainly clinical trial programs in place to evaluate that product, because I think it would be an important addition once we have evidence to support it.
So I think somebody asked, what is Air Supra? And that's a combination of albuterol and budesonide that was recently approved by FDA. AstraZeneca developed this product because FDA would not allow them to study budesonide for Moderol on a PRN basis.
Any other comments from the group before we move on to the next topic? Hearing none. So one of the questions that comes up on our end is what to do with hospitalized patients. So if you have a patient who's hospitalized with an asthma exacerbation and is being treated with systemic steroids, do you typically hold off on using an ICS? And if you do continue to use an ICS, how do you handle that situation? For example, do you have them use their home supply? Do you have your in-house pharmacy provide it, et cetera?
Well, can I first answer the opposite question?
Sure.
Which is that in the current environment, we're so nervous about sending a kid home on an appropriate thing that if we don't have a hospital shortage, which we don't right now, I'm going ahead and getting them their generic Flovent here, because at least I know they can take that one home. They just have to put a label on it to make that legal. So I'm doing that as a workaround in case we have trouble. But they're not leaving without a plan. You know, I'm sending a prescription, but as you guys know, it's been really bad. I'll let others speak to the shortage issue. It seems like it would make sense medically to not do that and just hold it if the hospital's short. But I've found that to be a clever way to guarantee they have at least about a month of treatment while I sort out the prior auth mess.
It's nice having that availability. We've not had that luxury here. Either our pharmacy does not have enough supply or they're unwilling to give up what little supply they do have. Dr. Federico, did you have a comment?
No, I was just going to say that we're doing the same thing, exactly like Christy said.
Okay. And how are you guys handling patients who are admitted to the hospital that don't have asthma, that might be there for weeks to months with other issues? Are you providing ICS through your pharmacy, or are you trying to get them to bring drug from home?
We've been providing it through our pharmacy, but we are sort of being more intentional about the use or not use of it is maybe the best way to say it. But yeah, we've been providing it through the pharmacy.
On the other hand, if the pharmacy doesn't stock what they're normally using, most hospitals have a policy where the parents can bring it in and the pharmacist checks it and puts special label on it, and then they use their home supply.
Adrian, I think Stuart had a question in the chat about the cost of shortages. Are you guys short, or are they telling you to be parsimonious with it because they're paying more? Because that might be happening.
Yeah, I think it's more the latter
Okay.
cost issue. Yeah.
So people may wonder why would it cost more if Flovent is now available as a generic, and the simple answer is that the company doesn't provide rebates, which lowers the cost to the insurance plan on it as a generic.
I had a follow-up question for that, and Leslie, you might know the answer. I'm not sure, but I heard that there's also like group purchasing. It's called like 502 or 503. I forgot what it's called. That hospitals do, like where they buy like more medicine at once. And I didn't know if that would be different with this new generic, given that it's through this like Prasco company versus GSK. But I wondered if there was an element of that making it more expensive too.
So I think you're talking, there is a pricing for hospitals that have a disproportionate share of poor people, where their acquisition cost is much lower. I don't know whether there's a rebate involved in that. There or may not be, but I don't know. I don't really know the answer.
They do pay lower costs, but I don't know whether it's contributing to the overall. I would imagine it's just supply and demand, right? But yeah, so like large safety net hospitals have that ability, but I don't, and they do pay less for the drugs. They get them at lower cost.
Chris Ehrman sent me an email about this, and he had talked to his pharmacy. This was from, I think, December or early January. And it's called 340B pricing. Sorry, I got that wrong. And they do group purchasing through an organization. So he said he thinks that this was before this went into effect, but right before. He thought that it may be much more expensive with the generic, even for hospitals with this type of arrangement. But I'm not sure if we've confirmed that.
So one of the questions that has come up is that many countries, including the US, have or are in the process of developing policies to reduce carbon footprint of inhalers. We can add the GINA article that Dr. Becerra was a part of, but does anybody want to comment on the apparent trend away from HFA-based MDI options and maybe update us on some of the HFO propellant products that might currently be in development?
I mean, I can take a stab at it if you want, Adrian. It's this is the second coming of the Montreal Protocol that some of us had the opportunity to live through, but there were some medical exemptions and there was time. Now there's a greater push to making environmentally friendly inhalers, and the HFA propellant that's currently in that's widely used has greenhouse gas properties. So it's on the list of products that needs to go away. The problem is that there isn't a readily identified replacement for that. So it's going to be problematic if there isn't a medical exemption offered for these inhalers like there was when the Montreal Protocol came into place. What's interesting, though, is that the DPIs are not as environmentally friendly as they may seem. They don't directly have the greenhouse off-gassing effects, but they have manufacturing issues that actually, in some studies, produce comparable environmental impact as the conventional MDIs that we have. So they're not necessarily an environmentally non-impactful approach. So, industry isn't ready for this. And once they identify an appropriately safe propellant, it then has to be tested in all these devices to assure that it's medically safe, that it is reliable, you know, the reliability of these inhalers is a really complicated space. You know, we take them for granted, but they're very sophisticated devices that have to dispense very precise amounts of medication. So it's going to take a while for us to have products that serve all the masters that are being required here. So this is going to take us some time. But it's just also to point out that the DPIs are not as green as they appear. They don't have the gas in them themselves, but their production is carries substantial global warming impact as well.
Yeah, but you know, when you really look at the amount, I don't know the exact numbers, but the amount of global warming resulting from inhalers has got to be trivial compared to all the other sources.
Completely agree. And that's the reason a medical exemption would seem entirely appropriate, given the remarkable medical need, because it isn't just asthma. I mean, asthma is the second most common disorder that requires these, or COPD. And there are more COPD patients on the planet than there are asthma patients.
I agree with everything that's been said. Let me just add a couple quick things and just mention why we may care about this as a profession. I'll start with that. I think the reason we need to care about this is, you know, absolute worst case scenario, we could imagine a scenario where these just gradually go away. Like we lost Q-Bar, now we lost brand name Flovent. I know they substituted it with another Flovent, but you know, that's probably a worst case scenario, right? But I think we need to make a case, like as a profession, that we need to maintain access to inhalers. So just a couple of things I was going to add on to what's already been said. The legislation that was passed in 2020 does include medical exemptions, and you guys are right that HFA emissions from inhalers are small. So I think it was maybe 2021 data, but HFA inhalers are responsible in the US for about 2.5% of HFA emissions. And the reason we care about HFA emissions is because it's a greenhouse gas. So it's more about phasing it down. So the vast majority of this is an industrial target. So air conditioning industry, refrigeration industry, and there is an allowance for medical products. But I think the point is sort of like this CFC to HFA thing, you know, there was a medical allowance. This was before my career, but like there was some time, there was some exemptions, but eventually it needed to change. So I think that's probably what we're going to be looking at. And it's not super clear on when, but it's not so drastic. But the other reason we need to care is Europe is considering much harsher, much faster bans. And if Europe bans this, like all HFAs, for example, they're also considering banning all forever chemicals, which could include HFO, which is one of the new propellants being studied. Then it could affect us because some of these decisions are made, you know, not unique to not only where some inhalers are made in Europe, but also some of these companies have like a worldwide thing and they might not want to be doing this here and this there. So for me, how this relates to this immediate discussion is, you know, and we've submitted a viewpoint to Annals about this pretty recently that's being reviewed. And I see Stuart has his hand raised. But what I was going to say is I just think we need to make a case. This is one more reason that we need all these payers to cover these devices. And our reason for publishing an editorial was to educate our own profession that some changes are coming down the line. And currently I believe there's one current HFA that has less global warming potential compared to the two that are being most actively used. So that's an easy substitute. And then the HFO propellant is being studied. So as these changes come, we don't want these drug companies to say, oh, no one buys these anymore. And they got dropped off all these formularies. Like, who cares? You know, it just gives more urgency for us to attack this at a large level, that kids need this. We're prescribing this. Kids are getting this. I mean, part of this is just like their business. Like we need to, I don't care about their bottom line, but we need to show them that this is a product we will continue to use. So that's the only reason I think that it kind of fits into this. If we go to payers and we go to Medicaids and we're like, not only do our patients need this, but we need people to stay on these drugs, or it's going to look like they're not important, which is not true at all. And I think Stuart's an expert on policy and advocacy too, so maybe we should call on him.
Sure, Dr. Sweet.
Thanks, Christy. Actually, just wanted to sort of emphasize the point you're making about the space. And the CFC to HFA transition was in the context where DPIs were not a significant percentage of the market. This is very different. And the risk that manufacturers will say it's no longer cost effective to manufacture drugs or inhalers with these new agents is real. At some point in our conversations, and Len alluded to this, related to the ability to use DPIs are also relevant for patients with severe COPD. And so this may be an opportunity for us to partner with our adult colleagues to emphasize the importance of keeping some inhalers that can be used with a spacer and aren't DPI or breath actuated available for patients who cannot generate the negative inspiratory pressure.
Yeah, that's a great point. Well, I think we're moving into our advocacy. We've talked about some global issues, and I just attached an article from Dr. Sweet and Dr. Salmitri for your review. But Christy, why don't you take over and discuss that, if you don't mind?
So, you know, I do the Pediatric Advocacy Committee for ATS, and I think for me, there's two kind of low-hanging fruit right now for us for advocacy. The stuff we're talking about for propellant switching and all that, that's a little more down the line, bigger stuff, regulatory stuff, FDA. But what we can do is, as has already been said in this call, we can work with payers to convince them to include an inhaler with a steroid. For me, probably the generic Flovent is the best option, given that Asthma-X is already on shortage. But just to include this in their formulary automatically for young kids. So that's one thing that we can do that will help a lot of our patients, and patients we're not even meeting in the specialty clinic, meaning patients out there with pediatricians who know they want to prescribe these type of devices, but may give up more quickly and shift people to DPIs more than we would. And then, so first is working with payers that way. The second low-hanging fruit is, I always say, you know, the advocacy committee is very good at publishing editorials. We like to do that, but you don't have to be on the committee to do that. So I think getting the word out is important. And getting the word out can happen a couple ways. I've been fortunate that I've had the opportunity to do some interviews with media sources. So certainly you can tell your institution if you guys are contacted about this Flovent shortage. My institution was contacted last week. And they gave my name and I gave an interview, and it helped the reporter understand the issue, and that article is now published. That's one example. But the other example is publishing an editorial that you wrote. So Stuart, with a little input from me, although I won't take too much credit, and some input from Lynn as well, has made a templated form of, it's like a Word document that's been shared with you in the chat. This is a template for what you could write in like a local press, basically. I think part of this is not just getting the word out, but like parents are upset, doctors are upset, everyone sees the need, and we kind of need to publicize this a little bit. All of this can help put pressure on these manufacturers and these insurance companies. And the message is, you guys need to stop putting profit above kids' lives. So this is just a template. You can use it, you can change it. I'm working at a high level to get an editorial published with Robin Cohen, trying for the New York Times, but there's no guarantees we'll get that in. It's being reviewed right now. So hopefully, because I think if we get something high profile, then it's easier to pressure some of these big names. But the other thing I wanted to empower you guys to do is contact your state Medicaids, because often hearing from a physician who's working in the state, who's a specialist, can be very helpful in that space as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Christy.
So I want to just make a note here. There are no monotherapy inhaled corticosteroids available as a true generic. And of course, Advair was the first to have one, and at that time, its worldwide income was somewhere around $6 billion, and so that motivated that being the first one. I don't know why there isn't a company trying to make a generic for Flovent, a true generic. But it must have to do with the cost, because inhaled corticosteroids have a flat dose response curve. It takes an enormous sample size, like 2,000 patients, which costs multiple millions of dollars to do that kind of study. So that may be why it's not, there are no other generics at the present time.
I think Monica had her hand raised.
I just wanted to call out some of what's going on in the chat. I completely agree, absolutely, advocating with your local Medicaid, although our Medicaid, and even there's some regional Medicaid, those formularies have come on board and they're doing well with the generic. Kaiser, at least in Colorado, has done the same. It's the Uniteds and the Cignas and the private insurance, commercial insurance, that's making the millions of dollars a year. So I just want to echo what Christy said, to the extent that we can put out there, you know, sort of where you're putting profit over children's lives and adult lives. I mean, sort of broadening this as much as possible, maybe partnering with the American Academy of Pediatrics, with the American Lung Association. I guess I'm sort of wondering if we can broaden this message.
I think
Monica, I
the
couldn't,
Association is trying to get the word out. They're pitching a lot of high-level media and they're helping us with our editorial. Hopefully they succeed. I mean, sometimes they pitch media and they don't care that much, but I'm starting to see more coverage. So I think that is good. What I was going to say, well, quickly, I was just going to say this quick thing about trying to work with payers. I think in your state, I haven't done this in my state, disclaimer. I've been like overwhelmed lately, so I'm gonna do that soon. But one of our payers is fine. There's another one I probably do need to contact. But I think even for some of the bigger ones, the PBMs or the insurances, like kind of like Google, because I know a pulmonologist who knows somebody who didn't realize that the CEO of Optum was like someone she trained with. So, you know, that's some emails that are happening. But just like maybe look up this stuff, and we can contact the big guns too. I think we need to. And you might even have a connection, I guess. So the point is, just because they're big doesn't mean we shouldn't try.
It's noteworthy that who's the independent senator from Vermont?
Bernie Sanders.
Yeah,
Yes.
apparently he's leading an investigation right now of why parents are having trouble getting inhaled corticosteroids for children. I don't know if for sure, but I read that somewhere.
Christy, did you want to comment on Senator Sanders's committee?
Yes. So it's the HELP committee, and they're very interested in why inhalers are so expensive in this country, and they're well aware that it affects COPD as well, and asthma. So I've had a formal meeting with their staff, some lawyers actually who staff his committee, and so has Robin Cohen. I know she doesn't mind me saying that. They've also met with at least one adult pulmonologist that we're aware of, and maybe a couple allergists. So they're very interested in the issue. You know, the focus of our meeting and several follow-up emails was they're trying to learn more about the issue. So, you know, they have the ability to investigate and pursue different actions, but part of the good thing that could come out of something like this is bad publicity, negative publicity, you know, getting called out, things like that. You guys may also recall a few months ago, the FTC called out and sent warning letters to a bunch of companies for basically trying to game the patent system. So I have the same question, like, why are there not other companies competing with Flovent, like a 24-year-old drug that there's no reason that there can't be? Like, is it hard to make that? I mean, I have no idea. I don't know. But like, were they one of the ones that was improperly still listed as under patent? Like, there's you know, I'm not an expert on all that regulatory side of things, but there's a book, and there were things that were listed in the book as they're still on patent when they're not. So I think in some ways the FTC was worried that companies were kind of trying to be lazy about doing what they need to do. And so it looks like there can't be generics, because if there were a lot of generics, like real generics, because currently there's no generic. If you think about this new Flovent, it's not a generic. Payers don't think of it as a generic. It's just a brand name drug with a different, you know, person being the middleman. They would eventually probably have to pay a lower price to be competitive, you know, like, so I think that could go a long way.
I think Annie, do you want to make some comments?
Oh, yeah. First and foremost, thank you so much, Dr. Taylor, Dr. O'Hagan, Dr. Santiago, for organizing this town hall and the opportunity to be a part of it. As you know, we're all experiencing, this is such an incredible challenge, not only for ourselves, our colleagues, but most importantly for our patients and families. And just quickly, in the interest of time, I couldn't echo my fellow panelists and presenters' comments more. And certainly on the comments in the chat as well about partnering with your state or regional AAPs and then national AAP as well. When this issue first came to light, it was almost like a knee-jerk reaction for me to contact our executive director of our state AAP, and not only, you know, for the partnerships that already are aligned with our state chapter and legislators, with state Medicaid, with also private insurers as well, but also, at least in our state, the vast majority of pediatricians are members of the state chapter. And so when it comes to opportunities to distribute education and in a multidisciplinary way as well, and we know our general pediatric colleagues are dealing with the landslide and the vast majority of patients with asthma that we aren't seeing in our practice. And so giving them tools to be able to combat this as well, and appropriate alternatives of therapies has been really important, as well as the escalation to the national level. And certainly Dr. Ben Hoffman, our current president of the National IP, is well aware and penned an excellent article, not only for our population of asthmatics, but also for those who require Flovent for other reasons, like those with eosinophilic esophagitis. And then before we move into the question, I just want to really highlight how these challenges really, you know, call for the importance of advocacy within our practice. And certainly that's been highlighted earlier. But, you know, it raises multiple important issues, not only in our asthmatic population that we take care of, but across our field. And so there is a advocacy town hall that will be forthcoming in April. We don't have a set date, but please be on the lookout for that. And many people who are already a part of this town hall will also be contributing to that as well, because not just for our patients and families, also demonstrating for our trainees the importance that we role that we stand. I certainly learned that from my fellowship director, Dr. John Mark.
Thank you, Annie. So in the interest of time, let me try to go over like all this very active discussion and questions on the chat. So hopefully we don't miss any of them. I think one of the first comments was, it's surprising that Asthmanex hasn't been on formulary for many of the companies, but I think Asthmanex has also come under short supply because we're all trying to switch to Asthmanex at this point. Same goes for Symbicort, and I think state to state, it seems to be the availability of substitutes like Asthmanex or Symbicort may depend on supply in each of our states. And I think the question about jerry-rigging the QVAR ReadyHaler has been addressed by our different panelists. I think somebody had said that they had asked the company and they said they can't guarantee the deposition when you twist off the QVAR and then use it as a regular MDI. I don't know if Len or Leslie want to make any comments about jerry-rigging QVAR at this point, unless we've answered that satisfactorily.
The one thing we don't know is whether that process changes the particle size distribution.
Mm-hmm.
So the advantage of QVAR delivering more drug to the smaller airways may be lost in that process, or it may not be, but that needs to be looked at.
And Dr. Stan Steffler wanted to ask you specifically, Leslie, what is going on with pharmacist education regarding appropriate substitution? If we say do not substitute, will that block inappropriate substitution and encourage communication with the prescriber?
Yeah. The pharmacist is only allowed to substitute in most states. Is only allowed to substitute a product that is labeled by FDA as AB. Meaning that it's bioequivalent, and there are none for monotherapies with inhaled steroids. For the combination products like Symbicort, for example, there is a
Generic.
there is a true generic that's available, but there isn't any true generics for any of the other inhaled steroids. So a pharmacist cannot substitute that without checking with the prescriber.
I think people have also said that we've had, all of us have going through like peer-to-peers, but that does really take a lot of time. Monica did share her cheat sheet on the chat, if any of you are like interested. And let's see. I think Ryan had said if you can document in your chart that the child was unable to use a breath activated inhaler, then that's made PAs easier. Somebody was asking about in-check dial G16 for evaluating and training children on how to use a breath activated and DPI. Does anybody know what check dial G16 is?
Yeah, it's a device that it has different settings for inspiratory flow, and it's a very, very effective way of training a child to use different devices. And it's relatively inexpensive too.
But we also use this in clinic to learn who do not seem ready for these devices.
Is it a single-use device? No.
No, you can put a mouthpiece on a cardboard mouthpiece on it.
And those mouthpieces cost like 10 cents, or at least they used to cost 10 cents when we started using it. They may be more now.
That's fair.
And somebody was asking, how is everyone providing education for breath activated devices with this urgent change and the pharmacists aren't using it? Somebody had said that they send an email on their portals to the ALA site on how to use different inhalers. Leslie, did you want to answer this question from John Bashara? He said, are you increasing the dose of ICS, but reduce it to 1 puff twice a day to let it last for 2 months instead of 1? And maybe you want to comment on, is it possible to use some of these inhalers like once a day? Does that go with the the kinetics of the dry powder?
I'll answer the last question first. And and if you have a patient that is well controlled, has been well controlled for a few months, it would be reasonable to step down to once a day. But there is limited data on giving once a day as the initial therapy, the step up. And certainly there is data with Flovent, once a day is not more effective than placebo when you're starting off a patient who hasn't been treated, and that's also true for cyclesinide. So there are some products like the fluticasone fumarate, GSK product that's been tested in children 5 to 11 with once a day, and it is more effective than placebo. So you have to actually look up the package insert for each of the products to see what their indications, the age that they've been tested.
I know many of us have also had a challenge with MART or SMART therapy because we can't get enough inhalers for the patients. But I think Dr. Stockrider mentions the frustration with maybe trying to write for an ICS formoterol product, and the companies want Advair. And so that kind of like impacts that as well. I don't know I think Len, you agreed. And I don't know if anybody has, and I think John Bashar from West Virginia as well agreed that, we would prefer to use the ICS formoterol products, but it seems like the salmeterol products are on a lot more formularies.
This year, I've had a lot of people who've been doing well on SMART now being told that they need to go off smart in January. Like, I'm sure you guys all have too. And it's almost making me like, do I want to start doing less smart? Because it's like, if it's just gonna be for a 1-year thing, I'm not doing that, but it's very frustrating. I think that's another thing we need to talk to parents about, by the way.
Yeah, that actually brings up a whole nother story, because
Right.
of the 20 studies on SMART, they were all but one was with the dry powder inhaler of Symbicort, which delivers twice as much drug to the airways. And none of the studies have tested used Holter monitoring. Formoterol, cumulative doses for formoterol increase the QT interval and increase the risk of torsades. So this has been largely, I think, pushed by AstraZeneca. And if you really look at the data, especially in children, it has a much narrower application.
Stan was wondering if the FDA was like aware of this issue. And do they have standards for comparing ICS with regards to low, medium, and high dose after all these years? And to his knowledge, the number of products labeled for children is minimal. I think, Monica, you mentioned that if you wanted to comment, that you met somebody on the board of the FDA this weekend and mentioned it.
I was at a social event for my daughter's parents' weekend at college, and he happened to say he was on the FDA. So I took a page out of Christy's book and I said, hey, have you heard about this? And he said he was aware. And I sort of gave my reasoning and said, that would be great if you guys would be thinking about this. So that's kind of as far as I got. I'm not sure I can give you a lot more details, but.
I will, as soon as we get off this, I will contact the head of the pulmonary division at FDA and make sure that she is aware of this problem if she isn't already. I don't think they have any criteria for testing the difference between low, medium, and high. And in fact, I think it'd be very difficult to show objectively because of the flat dose response for efficacy, which is not true for systemic. On the other hand, there is a dose response for systemic effect.
Dr. Sweet just posted a Flovent replacement algorithm in the chat if anybody's interested.
It's
Adrian, did I
similar
miss?
to what Monica, I think, had shared. It's something we developed over the last couple of months as well. So welcome to share it with anybody.
Adrian, did I miss any of the questions in the chat? I tried to go through.
I think
it was
you did.
very active. This is wonderful, everyone,
Yeah.
that we're all engaged and letting out our frustrations. But I think Christy, Monica's, and Anne's point, as well as if there are opportunities where you can advocate for the kids, let's look for them. I think I'm not sure if Stephanie Levinsky Desir is still on, but somebody was asking if there's an advocacy group in New York. I know Stephanie's been very active. I wasn't sure if she wanted to make any comments. She may not be on anymore, but I saw her earlier.
The other question that only came up is Miriam, if it's able to share slides with the participants to access that after the town hall.
Yes, we can definitely send around the slides.
So this town hall will be is being recorded, so it will be available on the ATS site, on the Peace Assembly ATS site very soon, right, Miriam? So there will be an opportunity to have your faculty or fellows who didn't get a chance to participate to see it. And so hopefully Miriam will also help us circulate the slides. I think, Christy brings up a good point that we should all work together and continue to raise awareness on this important issue. It's definitely, this is in our, this is in our wheelhouse, that the children are, you know, their health is being sacrificed by the dollar signs in front of like the other people. So I think it's we're all advocates, and this is a great opportunity for us to do what we can. It's 11:59. Dr. Leslie was very concerned about how we would manage time today. We're very grateful that so many people came on and stayed on. It just shows how important this this is to all of us. I think Christy also put in a link in the chat for looking up who of your senators might be on the help committee if you wanted to like write a little letter to them. So that's another way to like stay involved and advocate. And again, thank you all for coming. And we hope that this has been helpful, and watch out for announcements for our advocacy town hall in April. And we hope to see everybody in May in San Diego. Thank you.